Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode number 19 of the glich.stream podcast. 19 episodes. Again, I always say this at the beginning of every episode, but I'm still surprising myself that we're still going. So this is fantastic. As usual, you can find the link for, if you're watching from YouTube, you can find the link for the audio-only version and the podcast. I'm going to show it right now. I added a Linktree URL for you here so that you can pretty much get access to all of the different social networks and everywhere I post, as well as the podcast that is being released on all of the major platforms. If you are listening in from a podcast platform, you can also access this link. I'm going to add it to the description of this episode so that you can check out the YouTube video or YouTube version of what you're listening to. I have an exciting announcement that's going to take place probably in the next couple of weeks, so stay on the lookout for it. I thought about ways for you listeners to contribute and be part of this journey of this channel, and I want you to be involved in the decision making, the ideation, so on and so forth. So stay on the lookout. I'm going to also schedule a giveaway for some of the interesting books that I like personally, so I'm going to give you free copies of those. I'm going to announce the details about that in future episodes, so stay tuned. Not lastly, actually, what I want to do now is I want to introduce my guest. I have Marwa El Ghali with me. We are going to have a nice conversation about a lot of different stuff related to her background and her experience in tech. Marwa has studied computer science at the American University of Beirut. She did her master's degree over there, and then she worked for 9 years at CCT International before moving on to HedgeGuard, where she is now the Chief Operating Officer. And I'm not sure, part-time software engineer as well. I think she cannot really let go of the technical work. So we're going to talk about how these two things work together and her experience with that. Marwa, thank you very much for joining me today. Do you have anything to add? Do you have anything you'd like to add to your background?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. Thank you for that.
Awesome. So Marwa, let's start with the basics, and just let's talk about the beginnings. Why did you choose computer science?
It was a very basic reason, I think. When I started the major at the university, I met a lot of people who were the total computer science enthusiasts who had been dreaming of doing this or had been doing this since they were kids. I had never written a piece of code before I started the first computer science course. So what I wanted to do was I was an A student who liked science, majors or science-related topics, who needed to get into a major to find a decent job in Lebanon. So the options were not, plentiful. Computer science made sense in that way. So that's why I started it. It was something related sort of to mathematics, which is something I liked. I mean, mathematics was the other option I was looking at, but I decided to go for computer science instead because I didn't want to be just a math teacher. So yeah, that's why I got into it. And then I think just from the first one or two sessions that I attended of CMPS 200 for all those who did computer science at AUB, I think I knew that I liked it. It was something I could definitely go through.
It's interesting. There are a few things I wanna dig deeper into, because you mentioned that you didn't want to study mathematics or pure math because you didn't want to end up as a teacher. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Why is there an expectation that if you study pure math that you're gonna end up as a teacher?
I come from a sort of a conservative background here in Lebanon. I'm a female living in Lebanon. I didn't really intend on traveling anywhere for work. So at the time, I think still till today, if you want a profitable job in something like any of these scientific courses, as a female, it is expected if you enter a pure science trajectory that you're going to go teach. And still conservative families or your parents will tell you, oh, you become a school teacher, then you'd have, time to have a family. Your workload would coincide with, your children's schoolwork because they run at similar times. You would have the summer off. It's that idea of like, if you do a teaching job, then that would coincide with having a family life. So I didn't want to do a teaching job, and I didn't end up having a family life. I wanted to go into the industry instead. So yeah, I think that made more sense.
Amazing. And you said you were an A student. That's definitely an understatement. You were sort of a legend, actually, at the American University of Beirut. A lot of people talk about you and your achievements. So that's amazing, because you mentioned that you really did not have any, background in programming at all, but still academically you were able to achieve a lot. Do you think there's a correlation between people who have some, or at least let me ask the question differently. Do you think people who had a background were able to be successful, or do you think that's completely irrelevant and unnecessary, especially in computer science, and why?
I mean, especially I think in computer science, you have to have a specific skill set, regardless of whether you had a background or not, or whether you were inclined towards it growing up or even in school. It's a specific skill set of logical thought and sort of a programmatic way of thinking. Sort of if you have a tendency to understand algorithmic way of thinking or processing, then I think you would do well in computer science regardless of how you started out. I don't think your background or your tendencies or what you like would have affected your result in computer science. It's just whether you were inclined to understand the way it works.
How much do you believe the knowledge of mathematics and the practicality of it affects your success in computer science?
Not necessarily the knowledge of pure mathematics, let's say, or because I also did a math minor. So I definitely don't believe that the knowledge of, let's say algebra or what was the course, calculus or anything like that necessarily enters into it's more, again, the logic required behind those courses. It's the ability to think logically, to follow a process step by step, to understand why you're doing every step and the reason behind it and what is the cause of it. So I think both of those appear in mathematics and computer science, and I think that's what you would have to focus on in order to be good in both fields.
Great that you say this, because a lot of students are intimidated a little bit by the fact that for one reason or another, they think that they're not really great at math, irrespective of that, but they don't pursue computer science or engineering degrees just because of this exact specific reason.
Right.
From this, I want to ask you, because you did your master's degree also, why didn't you choose to pursue a career in academia, and why did you choose to go to the industry?
I think I can attribute that to a couple of reasons. First, I did start doing a lot of research, of course, during my graduate degree. I worked on publishing a few papers as well. So the work that came from doing research purely for academia, it's just the idea of having to answer questions that nobody really asked. It's just you're asking in order to produce something, just to produce another paper or make a small contribution somewhere. I get the noble purpose behind that, but it just didn't feel like I would be, let's say, making as much impact as I would have liked to make. And my experience, I would have to say, unfortunately, in the American University, working with different professors and the trajectory that different professors chose to take, those who chose to focus more on the research aspect of teaching rather than the class aspect, let's say, it really diverted from their, let's say, contribution to their students and during classes and so on. So I don't think I wanted to take that path, to focus just purely on the research. If I had wanted to enter into academia, it would have been to be as a teacher, but I didn't feel that the general climate actually helped that. So I thought maybe I would feel more of an impact going into the industry. And I think I did do that.
So let's say if you had a magic wand and you can literally change how academic work is done. Right?
Yeah.
How would that perfect world look like from your perspective?
It's kind of sad to say, but it all boils down to money, I think. It's just you have to here, wave a wand and give a university as much money as they need from wherever source they come from so that teachers can just focus on teaching without having to apply to grants or whatever. So teachers can focus on teaching and on their students and inspire their students that way. And there are research centers dedicated to doing research and not necessarily in universities. I mean, universities can collaborate with the research centers, but not necessarily do the work themselves or ask their students to do it purely to get their graduate degrees. So yeah, just wave the wand and spread some money around.
Interesting. So you feel like this is sort of a vicious cycle where academics have to go and raise funds for them to be able to do research, but in order for them to raise the funds, they have to produce papers, and sometimes these papers are just, empty sort of, or not necessarily, making a bigger dent in a certain in the certain field, just because they want to rush and go get more funding so that they can sustain their labs and their programs. Okay, yeah, that's clear, and that's, to be honest, yeah, it's quite sad. And yeah, I had different ideas about academia also while I was at university, and I also felt like this is definitely not something for me. And I've always thought that at some point down the line, I will raise enough funds so that I can spend time doing the research I enjoy doing and asking the questions that nobody wants to ask without the pressure of having to deal with all of the stuff that comes with it.
Exactly, yeah.
Still far away from it, but you never know. Let's see.
Good luck with that.
All right, awesome. Do you believe that academic performance has any impact or is a predictor for industry success?
Actually, I've seen that that's not the case. Like any field, I think whether you succeed in the industry or not might depend on a lot of factors, on sometimes luck, on finding the right connections, you might not have done well in university, then you find something you're passionate about in the industry, you find a job that you are dedicated to, or someone at your job that inspires you, and then you just project a success. So no, I don't think your performance or even the things you learn at university directly correlate to what you do later on in your career. They are just tools that are given to you to find your way around your career, maybe, or to learn some techniques. And then what you should do with them is purely up to you. So you chart your path after that, I think.
So what is the point of having a degree at all, actually? Why do you think it helps or it's completely utterly useless? Because there's a movement that says that degrees are really useless. The knowledge that you gain from a degree is not really practical. You cannot use it in the industry. What are your thoughts on this?
Especially in our industry, I think there is a more progressive movement now towards that our degrees are not really relevant to the industry. And if you take a look at our curriculum, I can only speak for the university system in Lebanon. I'm familiar with the curriculum here. I can't speak for anywhere else. But if you take a look at our curriculum here in university, it doesn't directly correlate to what is needed in the field. Let's say also what is needed purely in Lebanon. I'm not going to generalize. So yeah, I am at least for computer science or programming or technology in general, there isn't that much of a correlation. A degree, again, in Lebanon is purely a competitive edge. Someone with a degree would probably more likely be hired than someone without a degree, even if that someone is way more qualified. So yeah, it is unfortunately just a competitive edge that you put on your resume so that the HR would filter you out better than someone else.
Interesting. It's quite an expensive competitive edge, though.
Yeah, definitely. The more expensive, the higher you rank, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's, I understand. Do you feel like having a good grip on the fundamentals has any impact on you as a software engineer? So let's say you have a good understanding of algorithms, data structures, how relational databases work, language theory, all of that stuff. Do you think it had any impact on your performance as a software engineer?
I think it makes it easier. I think it makes it easier for you to onboard on whatever technology stack that you're required to work on at your job. I think it makes it easier to identify problems and find solutions to them. Again, they don't necessarily map directly to what you're going to be doing. You're not going to find the exact same, not the same language or not the same, part of code that you've seen somewhere before in university. But your understanding of them or your ability to logically analyze them, I think it would definitely help.
Let's diverge a little bit and talk about you and software engineering. What excites you about this field?
I don't know if I'm like in a select few group in those who are technology interested, but I'm not like a fast adopter of technology. I don't get really excited about new things in the field or anything like that. My interest stems from, again, just the logic that comes behind, having a problem and then you solve it by automation. So in a lot of the things that I've done in my jobs, the 2 jobs that I've had, a lot of the work that I've done was purely like support work, where I go and dig into code that someone else has written and try to find a problem, or have to add something into it, or discover a bug in it. And I that's the part I love the most. It's trying to follow someone else's logic, I guess, and try to adapt it, or change it, or adjust it, or make it better. And oftentimes I find that I learn by that. I learn by watching how someone else might have thought about a problem, or how they addressed it, how I might have addressed it differently, to compare the two. That's the part that I enjoy the most out of it, I think.
I've spent 15 years in the industry so far, and I've never ever heard a person say what you just said. So I want to dig deeper, and I want to ask you why.
I don't know. I've always had a fear of starting off a piece of code on a completely fresh white page. Even if I was doing something I'm completely familiar with, I would just copy code from somewhere else and just start completely changing it, just so I don't start off from a fresh page. Because I don't know what kind of fear that is. What do you want to call that? Phobia. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. You take something and you try to shift it around to make it something else. And I find that intriguing. I find that interesting, rather than, you can always, I mean, in code especially, you can just type whatever you want to do, and make it do something. But I find it interesting that you have something that maybe does a certain thing already, and then you change it to make it do something else. And I find that very interesting. So,
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think you are the dream, or this profile is the dream for a lot of companies who maintain like really large software
Legacy.
They cannot really, they're not necessarily legacy. It's like, it could be software that's currently heavily used, but they just cannot rewrite it every day. They don't want everyone on the team to be super ambitious about every single piece of tech. They just want to keep maintaining this code base, which is like very relevant, highly sophisticated, extremely important, and it yields probably millions of dollars for the business. And it's very important to maintain it, but it's very rare to find profiles like you who are capable and willing to keep on maintaining these large code bases. So is this, for you, does it come out of comfort, or does it come out of, this is something you find enjoyable, or this is something that drives you further, or this is something that, keeps you curious and wondering?
I wonder if the first led to the second. So if it was me trying to stay in my comfort zone that actually led me to start enjoying that, it's possible that I'm like afraid of trying something new, or going into something I'm not familiar with, discovering that I'm not that good at it, or that I don't understand it, or that I might require help with it. So that so I stick in my comfort zone, and then I find, okay, I like doing this, I enjoy it, and I'm good at it. So I think they complement each other, and I'm thankful that I'm able to do it in a place where they actually need something like that. So yeah.
Are you regretful of this, or do you feel like this has actually made your career the success that it is, or contributed to your success right now?
Both. It depends what time of day you ask me, or what's happening with me. Sometimes I look back and say, oh, what if I tried something else? Would I be in a different place in my career now? Would I've advanced more or done something more? And other times, especially if I just done something good, or I solved a problem, or I contributed in some way, then no, this is good, I'm doing something good. So yeah, it depends on time of day, I guess.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you now about, why did you spend 9 years in the same place, because also this is very different than what all of the different, and again, I don't want to generalize, but like all of the popularized statistics say, for example, that developers spend maybe roughly a couple of years in one place before they jump to another. Specifically, you know, in their 20s, they really don't like to settle in. They want to explore different territories, different fields, so on and so forth. I personally also sort of advise that, just because it depends on the level of ambition of a certain person, how far they want to go, how much they want to explore. You spent 9 years in the same company, but in different roles. You started as a junior developer, then you were a senior, then you were a lead, and then you ended up as a project manager. How did that serve your career? And do you think that was worthwhile? Would you do it differently if you had the chance? What's your perspective on this?
Also a tricky question, and depends on when you ask it. It goes back to all of the factors that I mentioned. For those who are not familiar with, I mean, CCT International was like a place where a lot of the AUB graduates from computer science went to work. So we were like just an extension of the university, sitting in a company. It was a very comfortable environment to be in. I learned a lot, for sure, in the several roles that I was in. And then I ended up working on a project that I basically started from scratch. And I ended up working on it for like 6 years. So again, the whole adoption of comfort, and it sort of became like my baby, and I had a hard time giving up on it. So you start off on a project like that, and then you don't want to let it go. It maybe hinders your career. It maybe blocks you a little bit. It makes you make some decisions that you might regret later on. But I learned a lot because I did all of those roles, because I was allowed to do all of those different roles, even working on one project. I definitely learned a lot. Would I have left earlier? Possibly. I maybe should have left earlier, but I don't regret any of the things I learned, for sure.
Don't you think there are many learning benefits to spending 6 years with the same code base? Because again, the code base is always evolving, right? You're adding more stuff to it. It's an evolutionary sort of setup. It's changing. And then the code base, when you're working on a greenfield project, it's relatively simple. But then when you have end users using it, it's much more complex. Do you think this is of added value? Any lessons you've taken from that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially that when I started off on a project from scratch, and you see all of the layers that it can involve through, and you take it from something that you just started to a product that you actually have to convince people to start using, that you have to implement, that you have to support. And I was doing multiple roles on that. So for sure, if you're going through a full product trajectory with a certain project or a certain product for clients, then you're gonna learn a lot. So it all depends on what kind of roles you're taking, what kind of projects you're working on. Even if you're in one company, you could be evolving through multiple layers, or you could be working for like 2 years on one single thing, and that could be very blocking for you. So that definitely contributed to the fact that I stayed that long. It's because I was, in a way, advancing through the company, through the multiple roles, even through the multiple projects that I worked on, and that is profitable to anybody, for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the technology stack you used for that project, if you're at liberty to say, and what about the scale of the product? It was for internal purposes, I'm assuming. How many users? Can you tell us a little bit more on the technicals of that?
Sure. So mostly I worked on like 2 products within CCT. One was a document management system, and the other was a fleet management system. The tech stack was purely like .NET, SQL Server, the regular Microsoft stack. The project that I started was the fleet management system, and it involved collaboration with like hardware providers and suppliers. And I had a team that was, like electrical engineers that were dedicated for that. So that collaboration was also very helpful. It was a whole learning scale all throughout. And then we evolved into like trying to make it IoT or whatever. So that's another learning curve. But yeah, the technology stack I've basically stuck through all throughout. I've worked mostly only on Microsoft stack, but the different aspects of the projects surely differ.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the fleet management system? Like, why was there a decision to build something like this in-house while there are obviously other platforms readily available? What would drive a company to build something like this and invest in it?
So CCT International is basically the software arm of CCC, the contracting company. Obviously, a contracting company of that size, which has a lot of large projects in the Gulf and so on. So they have a large fleet of equipment for construction, and a fleet monitoring system obviously is helpful to monitor location, utilization, activity of the equipment. It was thought because CCC owned CCT and had the software arm. They developed their own document management system in-house, even though obviously there's a lot in the market, and they want to develop the fleet management system as well. And it could be something that could be then sold to other clients potentially. So it was an investment in-house because it was thought to be a worthy investment considering the size of the fleet that CCC owned at the time, and considering the specific needs that they had regarding monitoring their equipment, especially heavy equipment, and the type of things they wanted to monitor. The products available in the market for that purpose were pretty expensive. So it was thought that a development in-house would be more profitable, more economical, and definitely you would be able to customize it at will.
Interesting that they think that in-house development is more economical. How many people were on that project? Like, how many engineers would be working on something like this?
It fluctuated over time depending on there was the trajectory of the project and how interesting it was to the management. So at one point, at the highest point, I think we were like 5 engineers working on it, and at the lowest point, it was just me and an electrical engineer. So it fluctuated.
Interesting. And was the system eventually deployed and utilized, or it came to a halt?
When I left, it was being utilized in a small scale. I'm not sure how it has evolved since then.
Okay, so it was more of a so for these years it was more of an experiment for this company with the tendency to spin it off potentially down the line,
right,
if you were able to be successful with it. That's interesting, and I like seeing companies that actually try these experiments and do these types of investments, because you never know what especially in these specific niche industries, because you never know what you can come up with.
Exactly.
I worked in the maritime industry for about 3 years, and I cannot count the number of ideas we've had for problems that could be solved with technology, right? That there isn't a readily available solution already on the market. And I know that venture capitalist funds drool on industry experts, who come up with stuff like this and solutions to problems. So, okay, cool. That's nice to hear. Let's move on a little bit and talk about, have you ever considered traveling and working outside of Lebanon?
It remains like a pipe dream where you think, oh, I think I can do it. Why can't I do it? I applied to Google a couple of times, went through the interview process there, thinking like, why don't I travel and work abroad? But yeah, again, the fear, the comfort zone, maybe wanting to remain close to my family, actually stopped me from doing all of that. But yeah, it remains a pipe dream, I guess.
I understand the sentiment. Whenever you go abroad, a lot of people have dreams that they want to leave, and I can understand it. You can have fulfill a lot of your potential outside, but you're also letting go of a lot of very important things in life that you only recognize once you fulfill the sustenance needs. Let's put it that way. What's the most challenging aspect of your current role? So let's move on to HedgeGuard a little bit and talk about your switch from building software for a construction company to financial systems and trading and this entire world, right? So tell us a little bit more about HedgeGuard first. What's the industry they're in? And then tell us a little bit more about your current role there.
Okay. So HedgeGuard Financial Software as a company is based in Paris. HedgeGuard SAL, which is the Beirut branch, let's say, of the company, is currently where the majority of the employees are. The company started off serving a portfolio management system to the traditional market. it has recently tried to expand into the crypto space. So working on providing a crypto-based portfolio management system and reporting system. So when I started off, and still till now, I am working the main software developer on the traditional portfolio management system. And about a year and a half ago, I was asked to take over as director of operations for the Beirut branch, aspiring COO, if we want to call that title, and to handle like all types of organization and logistics for the team in Beirut. Yeah, that's definitely been a challenge. I mean, it started off as, okay, we think you have the skills needed for organization, project management, that sort of skill set, I think maybe is required for someone who's really directing operations, let's say. I did not expect that when I was first hired. I didn't ask for it for sure. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
How did you handle the transition from building code, writing software, to dealing with operational challenges?
I think I tried to address it as if I was addressing a piece of code. Basically, I mean, honestly, the thing they told me, what top management said when they asked me to do this role, is that we think you have what it takes to be organized in order to do this role. I mean, you're organized in your code, so it should be like an organizational task. And I think that's how I started off addressing it. Like, okay, I'm going to write down a manual of how things should be done. And these are the organizational tasks that should be done, or this is how I'm going to split up the team and organize the communications. It's just like building a piece of code, actually, and determining how things communicate from one class to another, let's say. I don't know if it's right, because people are not exactly like pieces of code. They don't work as well like that. So yeah, that's been the challenge for me. I think it's just transitioning from, okay, these are people who have their ideas and their own thoughts and their own say in the matter, and it doesn't get as organized as you would like it, just like that.
True. I was gonna ask, like, how was your experience with treating people as if they are like sort of, I don't want to say it in this way, but like,
yeah, exactly.
People are not necessarily machines, and they don't really follow
Right.
instructions just because the instructions have been drafted in a way. So
Right.
yeah, that I understand that challenge fully, and I've personally made a mistake early on in my career. Also, when I tried to transition to management, I was like, yep, now people should do exactly what I say because I know how things should be done.
Right.
Right? And why aren't they following my instructions? They should be following my instructions. Because,
exactly.
Yeah, so I understand. Do you what are you undergoing any sort of training that will help you in this area, or are you more learning as you go? Are there any specific resources that you tap into to gain more insights of how you should approach these things?
I was actually assisted when I first started off with, I'm going to name it, I guess, Endeavor Lebanon, which is sort of an organization that reaches out to startups and small companies in Lebanon to help them out with their needs. So they hooked me up with a few counseling members or workshops to try to onboard onto this sort of organizational role, and it's helped a bit. For the most part, it's counsel and advice from my top management and learning on the go. The team has been mostly pretty supportive. They listen and support me in what I say, even when I'm being very dictatorship. So, but yeah, it's definitely a learning curve to try to adapt to what you think should be done or how you think things should be done versus, how people will embrace it and actually get it done.
Amazing. So how would you approach it? How would you approach managing people today versus how you started out? So what changed in your management style? Do you have any pointers, tips and tricks that we can maybe learn from?
Listen. I think listening a lot more than when I first started out. Listening to the team's needs first, and trying to address that. I guess not being very. I like to do things very expeditiously. So like, okay, we put this down. I put down the steps. Everything can be done. Like you can get this done in 1 week. Just the same way I write code. And yeah, it doesn't work that way. So it's just listening and taking the time to help people to adapt, and the fact that the organizational process, even in project management, on any type of project, even on a code project, it's just a learning process, and it's a learning curve, and it's going to adapt along the way. It's not just you set it off at the start and this is how it's going to work at the end. You're going to have to be flexible enough to change it along the way, otherwise it's not going to work.
Amazing. So Marwa, how many teams do you currently manage at your organization?
We're not a very large organization. I mean, speaking strictly for the Beirut office, we're around 22 people here right now. And those are like what I'm directly responsible for. There's probably like 15 or 16 other members in France and the US. So yeah, I'm directly responsible right now for the 22 people in Beirut who are working on like both activities at HedgeGuard, the traditional market and the crypto markets, and both products that are dedicated to that.
So the Beirut office has been opened as a mechanism to outsource a lot of the development work, probably as a maybe cost reduction mechanism, or maybe just to tap into talent that doesn't really exist in the original market. Do you think this strategy works? Is it good? Is it efficient? What's your perspective on that?
So the scale of the team in Beirut involves software developers, product management, financial officers, and even HR. So we cover the whole spectrum of the operations needed, all of them in Beirut. It definitely came from idea of, the founder of the company is Lebanese, so he wanted to encourage Lebanese talent and, provide job opportunities to them here, and as well from a cost effectiveness point of view. I mean, we both know how Lebanese talent works. They're just looking for an output somewhere in order to work. So it's definitely beneficial to work there. Obviously, we're familiar with all of the challenges that come from working out of Beirut. So that becomes a sort of a blocking point, but it remains extremely effective and extremely, also cost effective that you're operating a team out of Beirut. And it's actually like a good talking point when you're advertising to clients or, or even counterparties, like I'm working with a team out of Beirut. Sometimes it's concerning for them and sometimes it's like, oh, interesting.
And do you think it's a good strategic move? So beyond the sentimental value of, I'm Lebanese, I'm outside, I want to give back a little bit to the country. Do you think as a strategic decision, do you think companies should pursue something like this, or do you think they should have their development team or whatever operation they have as close as possible to headquarters?
I think it's helpful to have it diversified, not necessarily close to headquarters. I think it's helpful to have it in different places, spread out across the world. To have it in Beirut, it depends. If you have the logistics needed to support operating out of Beirut, whether it's funding or contacts or anything like that, to just make sure that your team is supported here in Beirut, given all of the challenges available, then it's definitely something to encourage. The people working out of Beirut have a lot to offer, obviously. So as long as you're able to understand and comprehend all of the challenges that come with working out of here, that your clients are able to understand all of the challenges as well, it's definitely something to encourage.
So what about you mentioned the diversification of operations is good. Spreading it across multiple geographical regions is also good. Why is that the case?
It helps you to cover different client operations, helps you to cover different client time zones. And it's a good cultural diversity perspective, I think. So even the team in France that we have currently operating, they come from different countries. So it's just a good cultural diversity environment to be in. And it gives different perspectives. I've noticed that, it just gives them different perspectives than people working in the same area with the same background. They approach things differently.
How does that help build better products?
As with any product or any project that you work on, you have different points of view and you notice certain gaps that other people might not. So it just it's with any team, you'd want it to be as diversified as possible just to cover all of your basis points, I think.
Don't you think homogeneity is more efficient, let's say, in making decisions faster, moving faster, while diversity will create more discussion points, more, so what should companies optimize for?
It's a balance. I mean, like anything, it's a balancing act. Homogeneity, yes, it will make everything go faster, but not necessarily better. I mean, especially if, like, let's say your management tier is homogeneous, they're all coming from the same background, and then your employees are completely diversified, then you're just, you're working on two different platforms. So it just helps to have diversity all throughout. Yes, it raises a conversation. We've had that several times. It just makes a whole different discussion, but I think the discussion is helpful. It's going to take more time, but it's worth it.
I always hate to ask this question, but I'm also curious about it. So in Lebanon, we have modernized quite a lot. We are quite avant-garde in a lot of ways of thinking, but also there are a lot of traditional, more conservative environments that are still taking place, practices, so on and so forth. Do you feel like your gender has affected you as a, in your leadership position? Has it posed any challenges for you in that environment? How was your experience?
I don't think it directly stems from working out of Lebanon or the conservative environment that we live in. From what I've noticed, it might stem from anywhere or from, any background that you encounter. I think we, at least as far as my experience goes, again, I'm not going to generalize, but I think we still have ways to go to fully just completely disregard the gender when it comes to someone in a managerial position or in a C-suite position, let's say. I've encountered several instances where, let's say, I would be questioned on certain decisions or the way I take certain decisions, especially in the way I told you I execute my decisions. And I'd be left wondering if I would have received the same reaction or the same feedback had I been a male manager, let's say. So I think we still have a ways to go in that regard. And I think that's regardless of where your environment is or if you're in a conservative environment or not.
So how would you approach if, for example, your authority is challenged, or how would you deal with something like that?
Again, that's been a learning curve. I've faced that throughout both my jobs, I think, and I haven't always taken it well. I've taken it personally. I have taken it as an offense. I think I'm learning to brush it off and try to revert to logic to make people see beyond the gender, I think, and go back to the idea behind it. I might be proven wrong. I have to also learn to accept when I'm wrong. But yeah, I think you have to learn that and make people understand as well that it's regardless of my gender, I have certain ideas or certain points of logic, and you're welcome to challenge them, but challenge them based on the points themselves and not because they're coming from me.
Amazing. Marwa, I'm always inspired by you, by your humility, because I know for a fact like how much you've achieved and how far you've gone, even though you don't necessarily like to talk or brag a little bit about them. But I know more about what you haven't really shared yet. Do you have any advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with? If you were, for example, to distill your entire experience into a set of tips or advice for the aspiring software engineers or maybe even future leaders, what would you leave them with?
Wow. To put in a few words advice, that's a difficult ask. Let's see. Always focus on what you want and believe in your ability to do what you want. And approach it with humility. I think it's helped a bit, but with confidence as well. And just my idea is always rely on logic, regardless of anything. Let go of your emotions and rely on logic.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Marwa, for this lovely chat. I always like chatting with you. And thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Bassem. It's been a pleasure.